Joining me now is Fox Nation host Tommy Lahren, journalist and lawyer Gerardo Rivera, and former Democrat mayor and TV legend Jerry Springer. Well, welcome to all of you. Three people with, I guess, slightly different perspectives on all this. Tommy, I know your position very pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment. You've been quite critical of McConaughey today. Gerardo, I know that you think it was, like me, a brilliant speech, and you're a conservative who says that, which is significant. And Jerry, you and I have discussed guns many times over the years. We worked together, and you're on the Democrat side of this. Before we get into the debate, there was a very interesting clip I found from when I interviewed Matthew McConaughey for Good Morning Britain about 18 months ago about what he saw as the real fundamental problem about democratic debate right now. Listen to this.
The extreme left and the extreme right completely illegitimize the other side, or they exaggerate that side's stance into an irrational state that makes no sense. And that's not fair when either side does that.
Gerardo, I want to start with you, because I thought he really hit the nail on the head there, that all these debates now, guns, abortion, whatever it is, you get the extremities on both sides who scream the loudest. They abuse each other. They mock each other. There's no consensus anymore. The sides don't come together and reach points of agreement. And what I thought was so striking about McConaughey's speech yesterday was he didn't seek to be incendiary. He wasn't really lecturing either side about their behaviour. He just wanted to try and bring people together, to try and bring some kind of sensible move to try and stop this kind of thing happening.
I thought, Piers, that it was the most brilliant, heartfelt speech I had ever heard about gun control, gun legislation, responsible gun ownership, however you want to characterize it. I think that people who seek to belittle him as an actor or a product of Hollywood, brush over the fact that he was a dad with children. He is a dad with children. That is his birth town. It was very clear that it ripped his heart out, as it should to all of us. It was just gut-wrenching. It's just one of those things, Piers, that my frustration about this is I don't think any of it matters. I don't think that Matthew McConaughey's speech, I don't think anyone is listening. Those who are listening are already convinced. It's the Second Amendment looms like this, this arbitrary, monstrous kind of edict that you must allow even crazy people to have weapons. I feel awful about what happened. Everyone in the United States, everyone across the world, as you suggest, in the UK and elsewhere, just feels that this has been a savage event. Despite Matthew McConaughey's eloquence, and believe me, I really do believe this is the best speech ever on this topic, I fear nothing will happen, Piers.
I mean, that's incredibly dispiriting to hear that. Tommy, I want to play another clip that Matthew McConaughey said. This is where he presented what he felt were the things that needed to be done. So let's listen to this.
We need to restore our family values. We need to restore our American values. And we need responsible gun ownership. Responsible gun ownership. We need background checks. We need to raise the minimum age to purchase an AR-15 rifle to 21. We need a waiting period for those rifles. We need red flag laws and consequences for those who abuse them.
Tommy, what part of that doesn't make complete sense, and in particular in light of what happened at Uvalde?
Well, I will say I do agree with him on restoring family values and American values, and I think a lot of this discussion and the tragedies that have happened in our country, both in Uvalde and elsewhere across our inner cities every single weekend where we see violence running rampant and a culture of lawlessness, I think restoring American values, family values, and changing our culture is incredibly important, and I'm glad that he mentioned that and brought it up. And I'd like to say I do give him a lot of credit for his speech. I'm not saying that his speech was bad. I'm not saying it offended me. I'm just saying this. Our constitutional rights threats do not come from Matthew McConaughey, any other actor, any other athlete, anybody. If he wants to run for office and be elected and change our laws and policies, I would encourage him to go for it. But I will say this, when we start unraveling gun control and gun rights, there is a discussion that can be had, Piers. And I'm not somebody that is so staunch in my beliefs of the Second Amendment that I don't believe there's any room for a conversation. I do believe that there are. I don't believe that there's a problem with increased background checks. However, when we start talking about red flag laws, this is where we have to really unravel this and have a discussion, because there's a lot in the Second Amendment community, a lot of folks that are very worried that someone will be able to infringe upon our right to gun ownership based on a he said, she said, saying, oh, this person's crazy, that person's crazy, in seeking a vendetta that will infringe on someone's constitutional rights.
Well, what about the specific point, Tommy? What about the specific...
Period.
What about this? I'm not disputing you don't raise valid points about red flag laws. They'd have to be run properly. But on this simple point that he was 3 years too young, this shooter at Uvalde, to buy a beer, but he could buy a semi-automatic rifle with no training. What possible logic is there that you shouldn't just raise, as McConaughey says, the age limit as a bare minimum to 21 for kids and make it the same age as for buying a beer?
Well, I have to ask you this, Pierre. Anytime we're discussing raising the age for things or changing policy, we need to ask, is the government really the solution here? Would this person who shot his grandmother in the face and then went on to shoot children in a massacre, would it matter if he was 18 or if he was 21? Are those that have mental illness, those that seek to destroy and kill and terrorize, do they care if they're 18, 19, 21, 45, 55?
Well, let me ask you this then. Why have any laws against anything? If your belief is that criminals will do it anyway, why have laws against murder, armed robbery, anything? I mean, the whole point of law, isn't it, is that you're not going to eliminate it. McConaughey said, we're not going to get rid of the problem. But what you hope to do by making further restrictions is you reduce, hopefully, the level of gun violence, which, as you know, America isn't just number one in the world for this kind of thing. It has more gun violence than the next 21 wealthiest countries in the world combined. So there's clearly a problem. I think McConaughey's just trying to work out what can we all agree on. And I just don't think I've not met anyone in America, frankly, who thinks it makes any sense that he couldn't buy a beer for another 3 years, but he could buy a semi-automatic rifle. I hear the argument, well, he's old enough to be in the military. Well, yeah, my brother was a British Army colonel, just retired. And, when he was 18, went into the military. But he received strict training regularly about his firearms. Constantly updated training. A civilian doesn't need to do that. They can just wander down, pass a cursory background check and buy a military-style semi-automatic rifle. It's that I think is crazy. Jerry, I want to bring you in on this because you've always had a view about this, which I think I've shared. I accept completely, by the way, that as a Brit, it's not for me to change American laws. But do you think, Jerry, coming from the world of entertainment as you do now, but previously politics, do you think Matthew McConaughey and this extraordinary speech could actually affect change?
Well, certainly it'll have some impact. But the fact is, the American people are virtually all, or pretty close to all, in agreement on the major idea of some kind of gun control. Most Americans absolutely believe that we ought to have background checks, that there ought to be red flag laws, in fact, most Americans believe that we ought to ban assault weapons. So it's not the problem that the American people don't want to change. The problem is, in a number of issues, we have a system whereby the government doesn't necessarily represent the will of the voters. It's a structural problem in the government. So you can have a few United States senators that can simply block any reasonable legislation. If you just let it up to a vote of the American people, do you think for a second the idea of background checks wouldn't pass? Do you think for a second we wouldn't be banning assault weapons? I mean, talk about an issue that doesn't have another side. Other than killing people as one thing, and two, possibly because you're a collector, what in the world does anyone outside of the military need an assault weapon for? We don't let people have hand grenades. We don't let people have rocket launchers. It has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. Every single right in the Constitution is permitted to be regulated if there is a legitimate governmental purpose. So, for example, in the Constitution, we have the right, Americans have the right to travel. We have the right to get on airplanes and go places. When 9/11 happened, we had regulations of that right to travel. When we got on a plane now, we have to have our luggage inspected. We have to empty our pockets. We go through metal detectors. When you have free speech, which is the First Amendment, there are regulations on that. Yelling fire in a theater or at 4 o'clock in the morning, going with a loudspeaker during a residential neighborhood and preaching your gospel. No, the police can come and say, I'm sorry, you're not allowed to be using your microphone at 4 o'clock in the morning in a residential neighborhood. We can have regulations. This is a
well, we can. I think that's
argument.
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, Geraldo, I suppose it seems to me this only gets resolved if the people that Matthew McConaughey, and I think he includes himself, responsible gun owners in America, reach an agreement that they are prepared to bring in new restrictions. Without that, and I think that's where McConaughey was very clever. He didn't try and demonize gun owners. He didn't call for any gun bans. What he said was, it's incumbent on responsible gun owners to look in the mirror, to find humility, to find knowledge, to find wisdom, and to find a way through this, because the world is watching. You know, I remember covering Sandy Hook and thinking, well, nothing will be the same again, as it wasn't after 9/11, as Jerry said. And yet, nothing changed. And here we are 10 years later, and you have almost an exact replica of what happened at Sandy Hook. We
do. First of all, I'd like to say hi to Mayor Springer, my former colleague in the daytime talk arena. Jerry, great to be on the show with you. Tommy, I see you much more often. You know, Piers, I wish that I had a more optimistic message. I wish that, as in most of human nature, what you said was true, that the consensus wants this, and therefore, ultimately, this will happen. This is not that situation, as you personally experienced, Piers, in your U.S. tenure. This is a lobby that is absolutely intransigent. There is no movement whatsoever. For example, ever since the Parkland massacre in Florida, I happened to have dinner with President and Mrs. Trump, a private dinner, just the family. It was actually the president and his sons, Laura, at Mar-a-Lago, and the president had just left the hospital, Parkland Hospital, and he had seen the damage caused by that military-style assault weapon, how it had evaporated entire limbs and heads and, eviscerated these people, how it was, he had never seen anything like it. He was deeply shaken and he was moved. So I proposed to him, I said, Mr. President, Nicholas Cruz, the shooter in this case, was 19 years old. How can it be that he can't have a beer, as you said, Piers, and he can buy this weapon? How can that be that he can access that? The same thing in Sandy Hook with Adam Lanza. The same thing recently in Buffalo and, of course, in Uvalde, where you have these teenagers that are absolutely restricted in U.S. law from alcohol consumption by driving a truck or anything like that, but yet they can buy these weapons. I proposed to the president a juvenile assault weapons ban. A juvenile assault. With this, we can do this. We can get the age from 18 to 21. Well, I'm not banning anything. I'm not taking any of your assault weapons. I have this modest step, logical step. If you can't drink a beer, you can't buy an assault weapon. Let's just do that. And I swear to God, I have seen the iron doors slamming shut.
Like I said,
took the blow.
I hope that's not the case. I mean, I just want to end this debate with just playing one more clip. This is Dr. Roy Guerrero. He was the pediatrician who actually witnessed and had to treat some of the young bodies. And he said this.
2 children whose bodies had been pulverized by bullets fired at them, decapitated, whose flesh had been ripped apart, that the only clue as their identities was a blood-splattered cartoon clothes still clinging to them.
I don't know how anyone can listen to stuff like that about kids in classrooms when they should be nurturing their lives, being taught, educating, moving on, and not actually want to do something. So I just hope people listen to that speech by McConaughey, listen to the testimony today of the young kids who smeared themselves with their friends' blood in the classrooms so that they could pretend to be dead. Listen to these people who had to treat these bodies. And then look at that pair of sneakers and understand that the mother of that little girl, Maite, that they could only recognise that little girl from her sneakers. And if that doesn't affect change, I really don't know what ever will. Thank you to my panel. I really appreciate it. And I think I want to carry on this debate in the spirit that Matthew McConaughey wants to do it, which is not to demonise anyone on any of the sides here, just to somehow try and affect some change. So thank you to Jerry, Geraldo and Tommy. Much appreciated.